We on?
Business of the board, here we go.
All right, good evening, everyone. I will start this evening's conversation for the Education Committee of the Whole. Mr. Mitchell is absent this evening. I have with me to assist Dr. Honderhan, who is our STEM supervisor, and Mrs. Franco, who is our humanities supervisor. So we will be tag teaming and going through the agenda this evening to review the topics. So number one, we want to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and some of the work that has been done. So you have to advance, Mrs. Franco. You are in control. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. There's been lots of conversation about artificial intelligence. I want to talk to you about the committee that's been developed and then some of the ideas that are emerging from this committee. And really, this was something that's been prompted by our staff because they would really appreciate guidance on this topic. We want to be able to provide the appropriate guidance to our students. So if I go back to the agenda before I dive in, we'll talk a little bit about, thank you, we will get a system down, artificial intelligence, some AI, and then we'll talk about some curriculum that are being developed right now or updated, as well as some resources to go along with the curricula. These will be scheduled for presentation to our board in May and then June. Typically what we do is present curriculum documents and then leave them sit for 30 days so that the board has ample opportunity to review them, as well as resources that administration requests to go along with them. And lastly, we'll talk a little bit about some achievement data. There were some questions posed to us about achievement gaps. We'll talk a little bit about what we see here in Perkiomen Valley and some of the things that we do to try and narrow those gaps and make sure we meet the needs of all students. Okay, so if you could advance. As I mentioned very briefly when I was going over the agenda, there is a committee that's been developed and it's comprised of teachers and administrators, and their conversations focus on appropriate use of artificial intelligence. And actually, even taking a step back, understanding all that is AI, all that would actually could be considered AI, and it's in some of the resources we already use. It's embedded, it's a part of. For many of us in life, some of the tools and the resources that we rely upon are based in artificial intelligence. If you have Alexa, if you have a car that will actually write a text for you, voice to text, there are lots of examples of artificial intelligence. What we're learning is that there are learning tools that are available to our staff and to our students. And really, the ultimate goal is to understand AI, where it exists, and how we can use it ethically, responsibly, and in alignment with our policies so that there are no violations. We want to develop our students around such resources in these ways. You can advance. Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about cheating. We've talked a little bit about plagiarism because these things come to mind for some of us on staff when we talk about artificial intelligence because of the power of some of these resources. These resources, such as ChatGPT, that you see noted on the screen, actually will compose and write for us. So we want to, again, be sure that we are guiding our students as well as our staff in how to use these resources ethically and responsibly. So a couple of words and paragraphs that are salient to the individuals on this committee and having these conversations. I've mentioned some of those in the first paragraph. We also want to be careful. There are AI tools and some of the resources we use that want our students' data. So we are aware of that and really careful about safeguarding our students' data. We also want to be careful about acknowledging biases or inaccuracies. When we rely upon AI, it's not Word. It's not necessarily 100% accurate. So we're also developing in our students, as well as our staff, critical thinking so that they really review what might be shared with them or produced through an AI resource, or even if it's a complement to a project they're working on. Critical thinking is important. We also want to make sure we take advantage of and capitalize on the opportunities for learning. There are some wonderful opportunities to be innovative, to be student-centered, to really personalize learning. Some of these tools are really powerful and can help us afford equitable access to learning for students who would otherwise maybe struggle in realizing that. Okay, so that was a quick snippet. I wanted to really just give you a sense of where we are. Again, this was requested by our staff. They wanted to have these conversations about AI. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for the district to consider a position statement that will also then align to what's expected in our policies, what we're held accountable for in our policies. We'll continue to work on this. Just an update for now. So thank you.
So we're excited to share with you some of the curriculum work that we've been doing this year, as well as what's on deck for next school year. As you know, the Park Valley School District uses the Universal Understanding by Design framework for curriculum. It's a backward design model, with stage 1 being identifying what are the desired results that we want from students, what do we want students to learn and be able to do as the result of our teaching. In stage 2, we look at assessment and think about what is the acceptable evidence of that learning, and then design assessments that target that evidence. And then in stage 3, we think about the teaching. How will we plan learning experiences and instruction to ensure that our students are meeting the desired results?
All right. And within stage 1, which we will be presenting to you all for approval, here is the makeup of that. So it all starts with the academic standards. That's where learning really, that's the target that we focus on. And within that standard, our teacher teams and our curriculum teams, we identify the knowledge and skills within that standard that it's asking what students should know and what skills they should demonstrate. Along the way, we're trying to develop skills that translate into the real world. So there is the transfer goal, and if we could just think back to when Dr. Russell was talking about AI, for example, we would want our students to be able to make ethical and responsible decisions. That would be a transfer goal, an example of one. And we want them, each of our units within our curriculum documents, to have big ideas and essential questions that are broad for students to consider, such as how has technology, for instance, created and also solved problems for us in society? And it's sort of a lens that students could be working through or looking through when they're uncovering knowledge and demonstrating skills.
So in May and June, we'll be presenting stage 1 curriculum documents for approval and review. The stage 1 really lays the foundation for the stage 2 and stage 3 work. In humanities, we'll be presenting for review and approval stage 1 curriculum guides for 6th grade social studies, middle level ELA, and K-5 music, as well as 2 new high school courses that were approved and have enough student enrollment to run next year, which are AP African American Studies and printmaking.
Yep, and for STEM, we focus this year primarily on K-5 math, and we'll be seeing a recommendation for a resource for that. Pre-calculus, which actually was started in the summer of 2024, and then engineering principles A, if you recall earlier in the year when it was presented that we were pulling back from some of our technology curriculum that we used in the past. I'm having trouble with the name right now. Project Lead the Way, right? This is some of the curriculum that we developed in-house.
I have one quick question about the AP African American. If you could just remind me, I think it has been said, but I don't remember off the top of my head. Will the class that currently is running become this class, or will both run?
Both will run.
Both will
One
run.
section of each.
One section of each, okay. And if there seems to be more interest in the AP,
There,
like in other words, will folks be limited, will students potentially be limited to the availability of the AP and have to take, do you know what I'm saying? Take the other one if,
No. So both courses were presented to students, and the students elected to be in one course or the other.
okay,
and there were only enough students to run one course of each.
Understood.
We
Okay.
would have run more if there were enough
Gotcha.
students.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay. Gotcha.
Wasn't there something with, you were looking at some sort of college alignment too with one of the universities? Was that-
Yes.
University of Pittsburgh.
University of Pittsburgh. I'm
Whatever
not
happened.
sure that I can speak to what happened to
I was
that
just- When you
agree-
mentioned that,
or
it just
potential
came
collaboration.
back to my memory about that.
whole conversation it was around.
The dual enrollment opportunities. I think we're still pursuing some of those.
Still potential possibility, okay.
And then one other question.
Okay.
So I'm so sorry. So the K-5 math, do you have targeted resources that you're going to be piloting? So are you looking to pivot away from the current resource?
Yes. Yep. Yeah, we'll be talking about that in just a second.
Go ahead.
But yep.
Proceed.
These are,
Yep, here's the,
why I was
for,
like,
so for going into next year, for the 25-26 school year, we mentioned that math was a focus at the elementary level last year, or this current year, I'm sorry. K through 8 science and explorations, as it deals with the STEEL standards, they're surrounding those will be a focus for next year, as well as Algebra 2 geometry and financial literacy, which will be a graduation requirement in the near future. So there's also new standards coming out for financial literacy, and we'll have to do a curriculum rewrite there. And then we're refining various curricula as well, and much of this was worked on in the summer of 2024. So we're just making some refinements to that.
Just to put my 2 cents in again, I think I've already said that. There is so limited space scheduling wise for some of these students as it is to take what they want and wish for. Financial literacy, while I understand the importance, and I know that PDE clearly sees an importance in it, if there's any way to take it as some sort of like summer bridge program, so that students are not forced to limit their scheduling for electives during the school year, or to even limit what they're taking as far as their math courses in order to have to take financial literacy, that then they can't take one of the higher level math classes because they have to squeeze this in because it's a requirement, that then they're not taking an AP calculus or whatever because they don't have room for it. If there's some way that we can tweak it, that this could be a bridge that they could do over the summer and still get their requirement in, I think that would be phenomenal for some of your students who are trying to do some of those higher level courses.
Yeah, to parlay on that, I think if I remember correctly, on the last time we had the conversation around financial literacy being a standalone, for the highest learners, what I had kind of sort of pondered was whether or not it could really, the requirement knowledge could actually just be a unit, and gathered and received, and they could just then move on. So within another class, at a certain point, I don't know that I'm not negating its importance. I just think that conceptually, there's a lot of our learners that can just get the info and be done with it rather than have it be a whole class.
Do you know, Dr. Honderhand, if there are specifics around how this is offered? Does it have to be a standalone class, or do we just have to meet standards?
So the guidance from PD recommends that it has to be at least a half-credit course.
That's guidance, though. It's not a mandate.
I believe it's I'm pretty sure it's a mandate. It says, but some of that is still being worked out. It's something I'll have to investigate to be sure.
So I guess content-wise, though, I guess, again, I feel like for higher learners, that half-credit content can be incorporated into almost like a
Other
lab
classes,
or something.
or maybe they can test out. If they demonstrate their
yeah,
knowledge,
yeah.
is it possible to test out? I'll do a little research too. We
Or
can learn
even
a
like
bit more.
with chemistry, you have a chem lab. So could you have like algebra with an algebra financial literacy lab one day a week?
Yeah.
Financial literacy lab.
Because although I do understand the content credit association, again, that amount of knowledge can be gained without having to endure
Yeah.
the half credit class, like, I got it, you know what I mean? I can,
I'll investigate those. I do know that MCIU, for example, you mentioned the summer bridge course, and I think that's something that they will be offering in the
yeah,
future.
how many hours it's worth
Yeah,
or
so
whatever.
I'll look.
Yeah.
I'll look up. And
That would be
provide
helpful,
that
just as an
information too.
option for those that maybe want to have another avenue and don't want to be, it just seems monotonous if once you get the information, you can move on.
I know, especially like any of the kids who are trying to take all the AP classes, and then any of your music kids who are trying to fit in all the music classes. There's no way to fit AP classes and music classes in unless you take summer courses. My oldest had to take, she took all of her history classes in the summer. She didn't take any of them as part of the school year, just so she could take all of her music classes. So, I mean, this could really put a hiccup for some of these kiddos.
Oh, it's interesting. I just found this on the PDE website. Can personal finance be integrated into another course? No, with a period. Act 35 requires that students take a course in personal finance literacy with a value of at least 1/2 credit or half of a full credit. Not sure what the difference is there. For LEAs currently integrating personal finance into an existing course, compliance with section 1551 requires separating the personal finance content into its own half-credit course.
That's bananas. So anyway, maybe then the summer choice.
Yeah, or something to actually advocate for with our state legislatures, a simple thing. I don't know how that will go, but, I think the idea
The
is
content's
certainly,
important, right?
the idea is certainly really important for our students today. When we hear about, my child doesn't understand how interest compounds over time, or if I take out credit card debt, how that might affect my credit rating, or how to write a check. I've got checks in my book. I can keep writing checks even though there's no money in the bank, those kinds of things. So there are lots of basics that are really important for our students that I think we do integrate in some of the courses. So we'll continue to work on it, but there's a nice FAQs in here. Yeah.
No. Okay, so on deck for next year is stage 1 development for the following courses, English 11 and 12, as well as 3 high school social studies courses and middle level French. And then continuous refinement of courses, our stage 1 documents that were approved last year. So continuous work in stage 2, looking at assessment, and stage 3 instruction. On deck for resources that we will be seeking approval for the humanities department, we'd be seeking approval for extending the subscription for Pebble Go, which is an informational text database that's used at the elementary schools. As you know, we're piloting 2 resources for elementary music play, and essential elements. Teachers are currently piloting those right now, and the preliminary feedback is that music play, which I think I also shared before, might be more appropriate for K-2, where essential elements might be more appropriate for grades 3 to 5. So we might be seeking approval to purchase both of those resources. And then for middle school ELA, we're currently piloting. Well, actually, for PSSAs, we took a break from piloting, but my perspectives had been piloted earlier this year, and then right after PSSAs, the pilot for interliterature will begin. Teachers have already received training on the resource, but the actual pilot will begin immediately following PSSAs. Not listed here would be resources for the 2 recently approved high school courses, AP African American Studies. We're looking to just purchase more textbooks that's currently used for the core for the core African American Studies class. That textbook is also approved by College Board for the AP course, so we'd be just looking to purchase additional copies of that text. And then for printmaking, there might be materials that we would request approval for.
Mrs. Franco, could I ask you, I'm sorry, I missed this. How would you delineate between music play and essential elements if both programs are recommended to the board? Could you review that very quickly for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so both programs offer resources for K to 5.
Yeah.
But the preliminary feedback from the general ed or from general music teachers is that music play seems more primary and won't really be received well from the upper elementary students. But it is highly interactive, really engaging for the younger learners. And then the opposite is true then for essential elements.
Thank you.
So we did have pretty robust conversation about that the last time we talked about that, I remember.
Yes.
And it seemed as though they were sort of it was discussed as sort of almost like a building block, that there would be foundationally this music play option for the interaction piece and the video interaction and all of those different modules that could be really even integrated
Yes,
outside of even the music classroom.
true.
In,
Yes.
in like kindergarten and first grade, for example,
Yes.
as supplemental classroom programs.
Correct.
Like for the
Yes.
the general teachers. And then the essential elements was more specific to theory.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you also for that, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was beneficial to be able to get both. I think I remember saying, why do we have to pick one or the other if we could really be benefiting students with both of them, you know, in that one size fits all type of thing.
Okay, and resources for STEM that we are recommending are for K-5 math. We've been using Math in Focus prior to this school year, and iReady is being piloted. iReady is a resource that's also used at the middle level, and so we're hoping to build some continuity between the elementary and middle school. Teachers have really liked it and saw gains within their classes and the students that have been using it. And then 6 through 8 who already are implementing iReady, we would like to add the personalized instruction component of iReady. And so this personalized instruction, which we're also asking for K-5, it's included in there too. It creates a learning path for each student that's individualized. And so it really meets the needs of all students, right? Whether that's our highest achieving students or the students that might need additional support, it targets everyone. And it creates learning paths for them, which then the teacher also, you know, it gives the teacher a little bit of guidance too, as to like the specific skills that each student would need support or enrichment on.
But we currently didn't have the intervention component of iReady.
For the middle school level, correct.
How,
We had some licenses actually, but we would like to purchase licenses for all students.
and K through 5 doesn't have it at all yet.
So the piloting teachers did have access to it.
Yeah, the intervention part is great because you get your target and your stretch goals, which
Yep.
is really a nice. It really does give you great progress monitoring data.
And it's a defined window of time that they work on it, and then they can just move on. So it's a good bridge activity to another. In between lessons, coming back from lunch, everybody jump on iReady, do your flight or whatever, and then seems like they're very excited. I don't know, they're little cartoon incentives. It's not really that exciting, but they seem excited about achieving them. Yes. So, is there data on progress being made on the iReady flights, the flight paths for the students that have been taking it in the pilot? Then,
Yes.
with progress, like I'm assuming that there's pretty significant progress.
So actually,
As long as they've been used. to
yeah, across all
fidelity.
our schools, actually, we've seen students, if we have like that, the 4 quadrants there in the upper right-hand corner where they are showing growth and also achievement as well.
Okay. I mean, they use it where I spend my daytime, and I think that it is a really nice complement to the actual classroom instruction because it's individualized, number one, but number two, it actually is kind of like a mental reset. So it does like it's dual. It's not, even though it's math, it's more interactive than just a sit and get. There's a sound component to it. I guess it talks through it and things like that. It's very user-friendly to them.
And at the high school level for Algebra 1, continued use of Desmos. And then for geometry, Algebra 2, pre-calculus and statistics, they've been using, Mathematic has been used at, I believe, pre-calc and statistics. And our geometry and Algebra 2 teachers have also been working with it to some extent this year. And we would like to recommend, again, to have consistency throughout those levels with that resource.
So we are presenting some data, student achievement data, specifically data that addresses the achievement gap. So, oh, go ahead.
I
Ah.
wasn't-
Oh.
So I just want to. I'm sorry. So I wanted to just give a little background. There was an article recently, actually, it was in the paper about some other Montgomery County school districts and the achievement gaps that exist there and what schools are doing to try and narrow these gaps. And in response to the board question about this, I mentioned that we would share some data for Perkiomen Valley and talk about it at an upcoming Education Committee of the Whole. And here we are. So when we presented the data in January as part of our annual data presentation, we didn't really focus on subgroups based on race. We focused on our English language learners and our special education students more so. So we wanted to come to that during this meeting and share with you some of the data that represents the achievement in the 23-24 school year and how our students across subgroups based on race are achieving over time relative to, well, actually in this case it's 1 year, but it's really Perkiomen Valley compared to like school districts based on our percentage of economic disadvantaged, school districts in Montgomery County overall, and then statewide, how we do. Very informative. So Perkiomen Valley is the first bar in each set of bars. So it's the reddish, dark pink, if you will. That's us.
Yeah. Paints a nice picture.
So relative to others, our students are achieving better, according to this graph. Yes. This is ELA, all grades. So the state has a formula. It can take an average of PSSA achievement as well as Keystone across grades 3 through 8, and then in 10th grade when our students take that literature Keystone exam. Okay, the next graph just is a line graph that indicates to you how our students are doing over time based on race in 3rd grade, 6th grade, and 8th grade. And 3rd grade is critical because that's when we want our students reading on or above grade level. That's an indicator of their success in school over time. And we get the vast majority of our students reading by 3rd grade. 6th and 8th grades, we're transitioning into middle school in 6th grade. We're transitioning out as an 8th grader. So where are our students relative to others on the state assessments? This particular measure, if you will. So again, you can see how our students are performing or achieving.
These lines are just our students.
Right, just our students, yep. So these are I think upper left is third graders in Perkiomen Valley, where the blue line represents our Asian students. The yellow are white. The orange line would be our black students, and the gray Hispanic. And in some cases, the N is fairly small in 3rd grade. So that achievement isn't based on a large cohort of students necessarily, except in the case of white. When you think about the breakdown, right, of if we break down the percentages of different races within our student populations. You see the 6th grade in the upper right, and you see the 8th grade. So if we take 30 seconds to a minute, we can talk about what we might observe.
So with regard to the Hispanic subset, that number there, is that reflective of those that self-identify as Hispanic, or what portion of those, I guess, would be ELL students?
Unknown from these data.
Okay.
Can't tell.
Because I wonder if maybe that's a lower, I don't know, if that would be a lower figure because maybe there's a barrier of
A language
barrier.
It's possible. It's possible. And we see in sixth grade, it's really, there's a downward trend that's ongoing, whereas in eighth grade, there's been some up and down.
Well, I'm
We see a
also
downward trend.
wondering, is there, that particular population tends to have more movement? So is it always, are we sure it's the same students, or have we had movement
Tracking,
within?
right.
So it could be that these aren't all the same students. A lot of these students could be move-ins, move-outs, depending on, especially if we're talking about the ELD population. We have a lot of students who move a lot.
Right. And it's difficult to track longitudinally how a cohort of students have done with a line graph. A bar graph helps us to do that better. But you're right, we'd have to really think about that and match things up so that
For
these
every
students
year,
in third
right.
grade, 3 years later, are the students in sixth grade. Well, how does their achievement look? And then 2 years later are the students in eighth grade.
And that particular population in general has more movement historically than other populations.
But it's a helpful graphic to show
Yeah,
that when
absolutely.
you pull the demographics apart, where you can focus more attention, dive deeper, I think.
Right.
I mean, there's no doubt that there's room for growth, by
Yeah,
all
right,
means. There's definite room for growth. There's clearly still an achievement gap. But it's nothing to sneeze at when you can see clearly that PV is
Comparably.
outperforming
Right.
where the others are. I mean, it shows that we're, the district's doing a good job at maintaining and supporting learning and superseding where other districts are. And we just need to keep that momentum and push it harder.
Right. And you'll see there will be some narrative comments later on in these slides, and that is the effort, yes. Okay. If we go to 10th grade English, again, you see similar data represented here, and the trends, at least in the most recent year, are downward. Whites maybe are pretty close to staying the same, but the others are indicating a downward trend in their achievement relative to the cohort before them. So here's math. A similar graph to the one that we reviewed a few minutes ago for ELA. So the pinkish red bar represents Perkiomen Valley, and then based on subgroup identification, how our students have achieved relative to those same students, similar subgroup in another district that qualifies as having the same economically disadvantaged percentage of students. Montgomery County is the blue, and then the purple is statewide. So math continues to be an area of focus for us. So you can see,
Reading has always been stronger for PV. Math has always been an area that we've been working on. I mean, there's been a lot of change with different curricular changes and interventions being put in place. So hopefully with all of these changes, we will see this trend shift where we have a little bit higher bars in the future. But so I'm not really surprised, but still, it's not anything to sneeze at.
Yeah, I think the IU and the state number especially give good context to the work that's being done in the district.
Absolutely.
yeah. So again, you see similar line graphs for third grade, sixth grade, and eighth grade based upon math PSSA results.
And see, and I say this over here. I don't always buy the eighth grade PSSEs because I don't really know how invested the kids are by eighth grade with PSSEs.
They
I
take a
feel
lot
like
of tests in eighth
feel
grade.
like we see this a lot, this significant drop come this age group for these kiddos, for this particular test.
Yeah,
It's a difficult exam as well. So the 8th grade PSA tends to be more rigorous than actually like the Keystone Algebra exam. So it's a rigorous test as well.
and they take science, ELA, and civics. So they're busy in 8th grade, and if they're in a Keystone course, if they're in Algebra 1, they also take the Keystone.
So that's another test
Right,
on
so
top of
some
it.
students in 8th grade are really taking several, could
Yeah.
take up to 5 assessments.
I just
Different discussion.
think
Different
adolescence
advocacy.
wise, there's the maturity factor plays a big piece. Yeah.
So here's algebra, and we've been really focused on algebra, so we see some nice increases for our Black students and our Hispanics. At the same time, we see a downward trend for our Asian and our white students. So we continue to focus on math, and you heard Dr. Honderhan mention lots of focus on math curricula, math resources. We continue to work with our teachers on instructional practices, and what we're learning pays off in learning today. That looks different from years ago. So really working with our teachers on that too. This is high school algebra, so we see some nice increases there. Versus middle level algebra, where we have most of our advanced students taking Algebra 1. In high school, these are on-level students. And here's science. So again, we look pretty good as a district relative to those other categories when we disaggregate our data by race. Perkiomen Valley outperforms in each of these groups. And we noted that science was a strength for all students across the board when we presented our data in January too. So this aligns to that. Line graphs indicating how we're doing a little bit more specifically from year to year. So cohort to cohort, not the same group of students. And here's biology, the keystone, and how students have trended. So the one thing that we did note as we were talking about some of these data is if we look at an analysis by race of all exams for AP exams our students take, there are very similar results for our students by subgroup. The percentage of students scoring a 3 or higher is fairly consistent, in particular in the 23-24 school year. A little less so in 2021, but we don't see the variability that we've seen in other graphs.
But if you take out the middle numbers and you look at 1920 and then 23-24, to me that's a more accurate comparison, because I feel like the 23-24 school year was like a more normal return
Yes, yeah.
to school.
Yep.
So then you're really looking, at 79 and 82 and 7, you know what I mean? It seems less significant of a dip.
Mm.
And it could be participation numbers as well. I mean,
So we're recovering from some of
That's
those
what I mean.
experiences.
That's what I
connected
mean.
to
It's
the
almost like a
pandemic.
little
Yeah,
reset.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think our educators, our teachers have noted that too.
yeah, that makes good sense.
So it was good to see that there was some catching up on the part of all of our students by the time those students who are taking APs are taking APs. So in addition, as we think about how our students are achieving, we often focus on those that have needs and need reinforcement, remediation, reteaching. We also want to continue to keep our eye on those that are ready for enrichment or enhancement or collapsing of curriculum, acceleration. So some questions about our gifted numbers have been raised, and again by subgroup. Do we have a gap, or in proportion to the enrollment across the district, do we see that same percentage identified as gifted students? And the data indicate to us that for Black or African American students or Hispanic, we do not see alignment in the percentage of students identified and qualifying for gifted services relative to the percentage of those students in our population overall. So something, again, we need to pay attention to.
Hit your number, hit your microphone.
And an over-identification, you almost need to put an arrow up on the first one. Because
Well-
that's a pretty significant discrepancy. I'm
Between
not
the
saying that they weren't,
Future ready, right.
yeah, I'm not saying that they weren't properly identified, but when you're talking about discrepancies, you have 11% to 5%. That's a big discrepancy, just like the Black or African American is 2% to 4%. So in general, you see a skew in results compared to the future ready. Again, I'm not saying that it's not that we don't have those students properly identified. It could be just that's the way the population is. But it is something to kind of keep an eye out that are there implicit biases that students are being recommended for testing based on their Asian heritage at a higher rate than students who are Hispanic or Black are being recommended for testing. We do universal screenings at one point, which you would think would pick up your general factors, but it still doesn't negate the fact that even though you have your universal screeners, you also have teacher recommendations where those kids end up being tested even if they don't pass that universal screener opportunity. So, or parents requesting testing at a higher rate. Sometimes,
At this parental advocacy, right?
yeah.
That was one of the conversation points we had when Dr. Champagne-Lee presented this data the first time, in conjunction with the new screening process. And so that would be great to get an update on that piece of it. I don't think that was implemented for this year yet.
We actually opted to move away from it because of some of the questions that were raised, and we just decided to put that on hold until we could explore a little bit more deeply, thinking that it may not be the best path to take for all students. So reflecting, and then of course Dr. Champagne-Lee transitioned, so we need to come back to that conversation at some point.
And I think it's helpful in keeping in mind, the points that Dr. Campley raised about parental advocacy versus implicit bias, as well as I continue to feel as though that we are under-identifying our gifted population just based on some of the other testing data that we receive, that are advanced on PSSAs. I know that that's not a screener for giftedness, but I think it does indicate competency of content. And so I just continue to feel as though even this number, this 386 children number,
Right.
I just feel like it's really a disservice to a portion that's falling through the cracks. That there are students that are truly not receiving the most rigorous education that they should.
So I'll play devil's advocate a little bit, just from I'll put on my hat. You have to keep in mind, there should be built-in enrichment opportunities through the curriculum, and it should be differentiation occurring within the general education. Gifted programming should be solely based for students who need to be taught in a way that they cannot access their education because their learning style is so different from everyone else. And that typically is the top 2%. So when you open it up and you start really taking in a lot of students, you start to create a situation where then your top 2% kids are mixed in, and they're not really getting that piece of education. Think about special education, right? And kids who need learning support or autistic support. Gifted support should be considered in that type of quandary. And those kiddos, if you open up the gates too wide and you get a little too lax with your criteria, you now have a kiddo who may have this 120 IQ, and you have all this multiple criteria with a 120 IQ sitting in a same room with a kid with a 150 IQ, and that's not going to be really, it's really difficult to differentiate and create an individualized plan in that environment. And I think that's where we need to come back to. There is a set criteria for gifted programming for kids who really are truly, quote unquote, gifted in the realm of what their learning needs are. And there should be that realm of those higher learners, those 120 kids, need to be differentiated through the general education curriculum. And if that's not happening, then there needs to be changes so that it does happen.
So I agree with that, Tammy, 100%. And that's conversation that I've had kind of throughout the time that I've been involved on the board. And I agree with you completely about the differentiation between actual gifted identification and advanced delivery of instruction. I think my feedback and my frustration has been that gifted programming here in this district, as I've observed it, has been more of an enrichment and not a differentiation. And I think, to me, that is sort of, so in other words, if it is going to stay an enrichment, and I don't think that it lacks value as an enrichment, but I do feel as though advanced learning curriculum should not be more, it should just be different, to the point that you made about an IEP, it's a GIEP. It's just not valued in the same way as delivering instruction in a way that actually is.
Yes. And I think that's an issue that's shared, not just in PV, but across districts, is how do we deliver it and how does it look? And I think that's
Public
shared
education,
in public education
Right.
in general. And unfortunately, it's become more of a status symbol to say I'm in the gifted class and I get advanced enrichment versus it being what's needed for those few that truly do
As
need
a neurodivergence.
a neurodivergence. Correct.
I agree with that.
But it's like, how do we get there? But
Yes.
that's a whole different, we went off on a whole different tangent.
So it's an important one, though. And I will remind the committee that we have committed to an MCIU gifted audit analysis. So they're going to look at everything that we do in qualifying a student for gifted services or indicating a student does not qualify for gifted services, and then the programming we provide. So stay tuned for that. I am really interested in hearing some feedback from the IU as a third party who sees a lot of gifted services and programming through the county. So let's see what we can learn and make sure that we're on track.
Is there a timeline for that at all? I know that we've
They-
been talking about it a lot.
Yeah, they are supposed to do some interviewing focus group conversations in May and then hope to have a report to us this summer.
Oh,
That's the
fantastic.
goal.
That's great.
Yeah.
And I know, I mean, listen, to me, it's an ongoing conversation. Like you said, it's an important point to bring up. And I don't think that it's Perkins and Valley's job to fix the systemic issue of differentiating education for all learners. But I think that, it does help our students if we do our part to kind of right it a little bit and take on control of what we can control. And if identification is just part of that, that would really kind of help all boats rise, in my view, even if it is a wider gap, opening the gates a little bit wider.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, all boats rise. And we also want to make sure that we are challenging all students. We are challenging all of our learners, and that's easier to do when our students are struggling learners or more middle of the road learners. On-level achievers, I could say. But our highest achievers are some of the most challenging students for us to meet and really continue to offer them rigor, which is what they need.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that the other piece of it, with lacking rigor and lacking identification, what, in my view, in hindsight, looking back, just on, what we know as students, we were all students ourselves, is that if we don't identify and provide rigor at the primary levels, then what happens is kids go to college and they don't understand what it's like to have to rise to an occasion of a challenge because they're used to skating through year over year because they weren't truly being challenged. So they don't understand the work ethic or whatever that what rigor feels like, I guess, is really, because it's uncomfortable. You know, it
Right.
shouldn't always be easy.
Right.
And so that's part of the, it shouldn't be just more, it should be
Right.
different.
And we want students to develop metacognitively so that they realize what they
Self-awareness,
need
right.
exactly to learn.
Right.
What do I need to do and how do I need to approach it so that I come away learning what it is I'm expected to learn? So we want them to work at that. Yeah.
And we
So-
want to set up future-ready.
Yes, future ready,
individuals,
absolutely.
you know,
And
once
we've
you
heard
get-
that. We've
right.
gotten that feedback from others that sometimes students are able to just cruise. And that is not what we
Here you
want
get
for
to
our
college
students.
and it's
Right.
crash and
There's-
burn. Yep.
Yeah, a
Yep.
wide awakening, yeah. If we go to the next slide, that really just breaks down for you by subgroup, students that have qualified for gifted participation, gifted services by race. And you can see that there's it's pretty stable from one year to the next for each subgroup. There are not extreme differences in the data that you're reviewing until you get to multiracial. And again, we don't have a lot of multiracial students, so that N is pretty low overall. So just a couple of points. In narrative format, we continue to rely upon data as we make decisions, or our teachers are guided in their instruction and what they do next for students. And we are thinking about how we set our teachers up to know what are best practices today. How should they focus? How do we meet students where they are today? Because as learners, they may be different, presenting differently than maybe we as learners presented. So things have changed. So we are constantly working on professional learning opportunities that help our teachers to realize how students learn, how to connect and meet their needs and move them forward. We have, as part of our most recent professional development plan, we've focused on culturally responsive pedagogy. So how do I really get to know the students in front of me that are more diverse than they once were? And what pedagogy, what approaches, what practices will make sense to move these students forward and help them to realize the learning? I can't just look through the lens that I know as myself. I need to think about those other lenses that represent the diversity among our students today. Universal design for learning, there's an approach for everybody. And we think about some of the things that we can do for some students that are actually good for all students. And that the goals are consistent. The learning outcomes we want for students are consistent. The means of getting them there to meet those learning outcomes or realize them can be different, and that's okay. And then high impact teaching strategies, there's research that supports some of the things that we do are more likely to pay off in learning than other things that we do. So some of those practices, again, John Hattie is a resource that we look to often when we talk about high impact teaching strategies. And we're focused on structured literacy because we have learned that explicit, that systematic, that data driven, and that phonemic awareness, phonics based experiences for our students pay off. For now, yes, this is where we are. And then our team of supervisors here continues to lead the review and the updating of our curriculum resources. There's a cycle that they follow. There's a policy that guides them. Implementing, teachers are supported in the implementation of an updated curriculum once board approved. And then again, we're focusing on some of our most struggling learners. In this case, we've called out our English language learners, our English language developing students. How are we making sure teachers have an awareness of the practices, the resources, the portions of the curricula, and maybe whatever other resources that they may have will really help them focus on meeting the needs of some of our most struggling learners, or those with a language barrier in this case. And the same with our special education students. So how do we bring our Tier 1 instruction? That's the instruction that is intended to meet the needs of all students. It doesn't always do that, but that's the intent. The instruction that we offer, that we deliver as part of the core curriculum. How do we make sure it meets the needs of all students? And in particular, we continue to focus on, in the most updated comprehensive plan, we continue to focus on our specialized groups that include English language learners, special education students, even economically disadvantaged in some cases. So these are some of the focus areas of us as a team.
I have a quick question about the curriculum implementation meetings. So I know a couple of months ago, however long ago it was, there was a conversation that I had had with you, Dr. Russell, about whether or not we ever offer feedback, like exit survey feedback from high school students, for example, on individual classes to see how they feel the class delivery actually went in line with the curriculum guide, for example, that's posted on our school district page, and whether or not that information could help you as supervisors of the implementation of the curriculum really understand how the message is getting across to the students. Obviously, that's not age appropriate for elementary students to say, like, well, I don't like how they taught me math. But I think for maybe some more of the classes where maybe there's a little bit of a struggle at the high school, maybe some feedback constructively could help, provide some insight into how the content's being delivered.
So, that's a great idea, and it is best practice. So the curriculum writing cycle or curriculum development goes through a 6-year cycle typically.
Mm-hmm.
And in the final years is like research and evaluation. And that often includes student focus groups as well as parent focus groups, community focus groups, teacher focus groups. So sometimes it happens in the form of a survey, which might be appropriate for, like you said, high school. But we could also meet with small groups of elementary students and just
Sure.
talk with them about
Well,
their
that could just be more
experience.
conversational, but
Yes.
like in
Mhm.
higher ed, how you get kind of an exit ticket as you
Yeah.
finish a class. And,
Yeah.
I think that instructors in general, especially in college level classes, really take that information to heart, because some things are really a gift in delivery. And yeah, this is really working for my students. I want to keep doing it. And then other things, it could just be that maybe the talking points are being hit within the curriculum, but maybe the materials are not 2025 worthy, or maybe the lens is just a little different, or maybe some vernacular should be really updated. It seems to me that they're, just going through the motions of the status quo of moving through the curriculum, it sometimes, it doesn't land like it should for very savvy teenagers. They're very self-aware in of the world around them, and they have basically a world's worth of information at their fingertips. So when the delivery doesn't hit right, it's then your ears turn off, and now you've completely written off the benefit of organized educational delivery. So I just feel as though it just would make everybody better if there was some collaboration.
Yep. And I would say at our middle school, that's what our PLC structures are for, and they're designed to do that. So teachers are looking at their standards that they were expecting students to learn, and then looking at assessment feedback to give them that information, and then redesigning their instruction based upon that data.
Right.
Mhm.
In the test, in other words, did they produce what I taught them?
Yep.
But I even mean conversationally in lecture form for the high school level.
Mhm.
I'm thinking specific to individual classes, but I just think it would be very
Yeah.
helpful.
And I don't know any specifics, but I would assume some teachers are probably doing that at the end of the year. I know that is somewhat of a common practice for teachers to do.
But it's not hitting you guys.
Right.
So that's where I mean in terms of maybe for themselves, they may do that as a touch point for their own personal edification, but I think that would help building leadership as well as district office leadership to really oversee consistent implementation of curriculum and all. It doesn't help if one social studies teacher is doing it, for example, if all of the other ones aren't doing the same best practice.
There are school districts that do administer end-of-course assessments or surveys, evaluations. That may be something we should talk more about with our leadership team. Great. Okay, so that actually ends our agenda and some of the detail that goes along with each of the agenda items. Is there anything else for the good of the group?
The efficiency. If I hadn't gone on for 2 more minutes, it would have been over at 8. I'm so sorry.
It's okay, I think we started just 2 minutes late.
Oh, so then it was exact.
It was about an hour.
I know you got me and Tim here on one side of the table.
But
Todd, you got
we-
anything? You got anything, Todd?
Thank you. Well. Yeah. Well, we certainly appreciate the conversation always. It's nice to have some conversation at committee meetings instead of just presenting. Well, we're not going to do that, so thank you all, and have a great night.
Thank you.
Mr. Coleman.